Hello and welcome to Get Kafka-Nated, the show where we explore the fascinating world of Apache Kafka, from architectural deep dive to the people who make it happen. I'm Hugh, your host, and I'm excited to be back for our second episode. As always, we've got a coffee on us for our live audience. You'll find the link to claim your voucher in the chat. Quick reminder, it's currently only available in Europe and North America, but we're working hard to expand this globally for future episodes. Today, we're shifting gears from product leadership to open source development. I'm delighted to welcome Josep Prat, a long-time contributor to Apache Kafka and passionate advocate for stable open source development. Welcome to the show, Josep.
Thank you for having me, and nice intro that you have over there. I mean, nice walking through the places. It's cool.
Good stuff. So, first question. You've been in software engineering for more than 15 years, longer than there has been an Apache Kafka project, if that's kind to say.
Yeah,
how is
I
the
was
open
counting,
source
and it's
landscape
20.
changed?
I was
20
counting now, and
years.
it's 20 already. So it's really, yeah. I'm feeling old now. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to immediately open with like a so old question mark.
Yeah.
But in that time, how has the open source landscape changed?
I mean, it changed a lot. So obviously, open source has been there for even longer than I was basically coding. So I started coding, and there was already open source. So obviously, I'm not older than open source. That goes way beyond me. Not everybody can say that, but I at least can say that. However, yeah, contributing to Kafka, for example, yeah, Kafka is younger than me coding. So that's something that happens. How the thing changed as well is obviously we went more from something that people existed somewhere, like open source. It's people were doing things and not really realizing that we're using it every single day. And people contributing to it, it was more a subset of people that they were a different breed, that they were doing this thing on their own time, in their own after work. And basically they were doing two jobs, like their day job, and in the afternoon they were doing the thing that they liked, which was contributing to open source. Nowadays that changed. Now it's people do it also during their work time, and they are helping and shaping the whole open source ecosystem at work and after work, because that didn't change. So we still do it things in both sides of the clock.
Amazing. So you are an open source contributor. You've been a contributor to the Apache Kafka project, among others, I assume. What drew you to being a contributor rather than just a user of open source?
That's a really great question, and I love to explain that one. And many people have a really great story on how they went into open source, and many people say, yeah, because I had this great idea and I went for it and I open sourced this project and all that. By me, so what I did, I fixed the bug. I typo. The first thing I did was I was consuming open source for quite a long time, and I was reading documentation. I was trying to build proof of concepts. I was building things, and I was sometimes finding bugs or mistakes, and sometimes even documentation was wrongly written. But I did the thing that I now say, please don't do that. I was doing it myself. I was just ignoring it and kept working until one day changed, and I don't know what happened on my head, but I decided to basically fix a typo. And the typo was purely removing an S out of a word. That was my first open source contribution to a project, and it was just removing an S. I submitted that thing and I said, okay, today I will do it. Today I will behave as a good citizen of the open source projects, and I will report that thing and I will contribute it back. I did that, and the next thing came, and the next one came, and then I suddenly started building features for that project, and until I became a committer of that project several months later. So there is no small starts, small beginnings, or tiny things. Every change is important. And my journey that led me where I am right now started with a S that was too much.
That's so cool. It's so funny. Like that's a very familiar experience. I think my first proper contribution was to Apache Druid last year, actually, where I was like changing the name of a variable that was, I don't think it was changing an S, but it was like capitalization or something like that. And then, it's so easy to get hooked. Mentioning an Apache project there, could you walk us through your experience kind of contributing to Apache Kafka specifically? What's it like working with the Kafka community on features rather than just making these kind of small fixes? And how does that contribution process actually work for someone who's looking from the outside, maybe?
Yeah. So let me go. We were hinting at my oldness before, so let me go back to this one. So when we started, when I joined Aiven, that was already almost 4.5 years ago. My job was to contribute to Apache Kafka. That was what I was hired for. It was like, please go ahead and contribute to Apache Kafka. At that point in time, the community looked quite differently, and it was mostly Confluent employees being the committers, contributors, and mostly them driving the whole project. Slowly and steadily, more and more companies were coming together, contributing to Kafka, and it evolved and it basically changed rapidly in a way that it was not anymore a single company driven project, but rather a multi-company project. So I usually want to refer to these as the diversity of affiliation factor of an open source project. Many open source projects have a diversity of affiliation of one. It's only one single company that dominates the whole thing. And that's actually sometimes bad for the community, because then it's mostly one single view, one single mind that gets implemented into the project. With Kafka, I've seen being more or less into that one, and big kudos to Confluent as well, who were open to accept more and more people not working at their company to become committers, and they were opening the doors for everyone to come in and to contribute and to support Kafka. And now the affiliation diversity is quite high. So there are now plenty of companies that are having maintainers that employ maintainers to contribute and to evolve Kafka. And the second part of the question that he said as well is like, how does it look like, and how does a change request, so to say, go? So there are certain types of change requests. So there are the back fixing, as I said before, the one type of fix that you can just simply go ahead and do it. So those are more or less minimalistic changes or simple changes that you don't change much of the behavior or even of the public API of the project. For those ones, you can simply create a ticket and then go and contribute. However, when the change is more substantial, when you're changing the API, when you're changing a big semantics of what the project is doing, Kafka has a concept of Kafka improvement proposals. And that's really long name, so we never call it that way. We always call it KIP, so KIP. And the KIP is a process where you define first this proposal. I've heard people call it white paper, and I think it's quite accurate. It's a technical white paper that describes in really specific detail what is this change doing. So why are we doing, what pieces of software are we modifying, what is the migration plan, what is the test plan, and if there is any deprecation needed, how we make that happen. And first, what we do is we write this big, nice document, and we share it with the rest of the community. And what we ask is, hey, do you have comments for it? Many people who are versed in this thing called internet, they might have heard about the RFCs, which is the request for comments. That is how the internet is being standardized. It's basically throwing a new RFC, people comment on it, amend, and then they implement that as a standard. That's not so much different. So what we do is we have this proposal, we offer it for discussion, people comment and propose ideas, offer either identify weak points, propose tweaks to make it more resilient, better, more scalable. And then the proposal is modified until it's reaching some kind of sort of lazy and quiet consensus, as in there is no more feedback. And then there is an official voting process that lasts 3 days at least, where 3 maintainers at least need to say yes, and you need to have more yeses than nos in order to get that feature in. And that's how complicated or not complicated to get a feature, which is quite a big one, a considerable one, to get into Apache Kafka.
Amazing. I think we spoke briefly there about like your first commit being like the small change, like fix, like add an S or something. Do you remember what your first major contribution that maybe required a KIP or required some discussion was? And what was the reception to it like in the Kafka community?
Yeah. So I had a couple of changes that required a kip, and some of the cases were when we needed to replace one class with another one. So we needed to refactor a piece of software that existed, but unfortunately, or fortunately for this question, the class that we wanted to modify was a public class. So when you have a public class, that means that your clients are actually depending on that contract that you're offering them. You have a contract, your API is a contract with the end user in that sense. And we cannot change that thing like that, like in one moment. Kafka use semantic versioning, so we have like the 3 different levels of numbers, and each number means something. You have the smaller one, which is the patch one, which only can contain bugs and implementation detail changes. The minor one, which is the middle number, is the one that brings new features in. And the first number is the one that brings breaking changes. So whenever you have a breaking change, which is sometimes it's removal of APIs, for example, or a big refactoring, or the middle one, which is adding new features, is when kips are usually added. So the first one that I did was replacing some classes with other ones, changing the hierarchy, changing the methods in that. And that required a kip. It was not so much of a controversial kip, and it was mostly agreeing that's exactly how it would look like. That's the testing strategy, and then we moved forward.
Amazing. So I think we've spoken about a lot, kind of your journey as this contributor. You make your small changes, you work your way up, you get involved in bigger features, and the process of the discussion of steering and shaping the Kafka project with these bigger changes with kips. On the topic of kind of steering and shaping Kafka, you've mentioned that as well as being a contributor, you're a maintainer and a committer on the project. Can you speak a little bit to the difference between those 2 roles?
Yeah, so Apache Kafka has actually 2 more roles within committership or maintainership. And if we talk about open source in general, usually you have 2 blocks. And the first block is a contributor. The second one is a maintainer or committer, depending which nomenclature you want to use. Contributor is a person that either contributes code or contributes bug reports, contributes reports of new features, or even contributes reproduce pieces of code, like reproducibles for reproducing bugs that are being reported by others. All these group of people are called contributors. A contributor is a person that helps move the project forward, and by proposing changes to be incorporated. And then a maintainer is a person that has the technical rights to incorporate those ones into their project. So they are the ones that can decide that's a change request that we are willing to accept as our own, because that's the non-spoken contract that many people fail to understand. When we contribute to open source software, we usually, as a contributor, we say, hey, I've done this thing, take it. And when sometimes maintainers need to say, no, sorry, I can't, people get frustrated as well. I put that much work on that one. Why won't you accept it? I've done the work. The problem is the relationship is way more complicated. What happens is the maintainer needs to accept that code as if it were their own code, because this contributor that came and gave us this code might not come back tomorrow. It might be gone forever from the project. And then it's up to the maintainers to make sure that that code is not only working today, that is given away to us, but also next month, next year, and in 5 years. You should assume that any code that's written, it's there forever until something big happens. So a maintainer needs to analyze and think, is that change needed? Second, do I understand this change enough? And I understand the reason why and how it's done, so I can maintain it on my own without needing to always ask the original person. And that's the role of the maintainer. And on Apache projects, on Apache Server Foundation projects, there is an extra role which is called PMC, which is basically the short of Project Management Committee. And when you are a PMC member, so when you are a member of this committee, what you need to do is you need to approve new versions. So it's a subset of the maintainers that they decide more or less which new versions of Kafka being delivered, and they need to validate that that's a correct version. They also nominate new committers into the project or new maintainers into the project. So they graduate contributors to committers and from committers to PMC members. And that's the three levels of, not hierarchy, but basically the three groups of people that are involved into an open source project. On Apache Kafka project, on Apache software projects, there is also the concept of a chair of a project, which is just one person chosen between the PMC members who acts as a visible head. It's not that he has more power. It's not that they can decide anything extraordinary. It's just them being the visible head and making the reports to how the project is going and how is the healthy status of the project.
On that second group, for the maintainers, we're talking about the tension between, as a contributor, you're like, oh, I've worked hard on this thing and I want to see it in the project. And as a maintainer where you're like, I'm responsible for this as it gets merged, if it gets merged. I know as a contributor myself, sometimes it can feel frustrating, waiting 6 months to see something merged sometimes. From a maintainer's perspective, like, how are you evaluating and prioritizing that constant stream of feature requests and bug reports and KIPs? Like, what's your process for deciding what should get attention first?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and sometimes, so Kafka is a huge project, so that's for starters, and one cannot be the expert of everything, because you might know enough to be dangerous in some places, but you might not want to be the one merging something controversial in that, because you might not have all the context and all the specific internal knowledge of how things should be happening, and you just have a really good understanding of that. So sometimes maintainers try to restrict themselves into the areas where they are really sure that that change makes sense and that the project will move forward by incorporating that change. So that already restricts quite a lot from what a maintainer would feel comfortable introducing to the code base. That being said, so you try to look at what's my area of expertise, that one. So I'm trying to look for PRs in there, and then I'm trying to basically make sure that the ones that make sense are being incorporated. And sometimes another thing that I usually tend to do, or I try to do when I have enough time, is go through the PR changes that are small ones, tiny ones, the ones that usually are coming from first-time contributors or second-time contributors. The type of fixing, the documentation fix, I was looking at the code and that's a warning that I want to get rid of it. Those ones usually are low effort, as in for the maintainer to evaluate and say, yeah, that makes complete sense. We should have done this thing forever. We never had time for it. And those ones are some of the ones that I try to find sometimes every now and then to review and merge, because those ones traditionally are coming from people who have the first contact with the project. And I was given that treatment when I started contributing to open source projects. I found a couple of people that they were really nice to me when I started, and I'm trying to pay it back the same way when I'm seeing those first-time contributor badges in GitHub, which is an awesome feature that they introduced. I'm trying to give a nicer trade for them and trying to guide them better into, hey, look, that's what you did. That's awesome. Try to make it this other way, or that's not exactly the process that you should follow. First do that, and then we can do this thing. And that's basically what a maintainer usually tries to look at. One other problem as well is that maintainers are right now usually employed to work on this project. And corporate and money making on companies usually are evaluating people on how much they produce. By reviewing PRs, there is not so much you are producing at those moments. So many companies fail to understand that also having review in your performance metrics as a maintainer is a must-have metric that you need to have. And that's something, for example, at Aiven we did quite a long time. So whenever you are a maintainer of a project, one of your metrics, KPIs for you, is not only like how many commits are you doing or how many features are you delivering as well, but how many PRs are you reviewing. And I like one thing a lot from the Postgres community. It's not a rule, but they usually say to have a PR merge, you should have reviewed 2. And that's a really good guideline thing. I mean, it's not a rule. It's not that it cannot happen without doing that. But if any maintainer tries to do 2 reviews before trying to propose a change, that would be quite a nice behavior and quite a nice ecosystem we are leaving behind.
That's super cool. It reminds me a lot of, you hear in the medical profession, this idea of learning how to do a procedure, completing the procedure independently for the first time, and then teaching it, right? It's that sense of like, the best way to become an expert is to be a teacher first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
Super cool. So would you say it's fair to say then, as a maintainer, that your energy is put both into like your area of expertise within the project, but also into like nourishing that, like, and nurturing that kind of grassroots, maybe the non-professional contributors who are coming through?
Yeah. And one of the hardest things sometimes as a maintainer is to not do something and leave it there for somebody else to do it. You know that you would do this thing in 10 minutes sometimes. It's like, oh, I can do this thing. Obviously, if it's a really important, crucial thing, please go ahead and do it. But when it's just a nice to have thing, you create a ticket for it. In Kafka, for example, there is a nice label in Jira, and we have one label which is called newbie. And the newbie label is usually to indicate features that people with not so much deeper knowledge on Kafka can take and safely perform. And those ones sometimes come from the spillover from maintainers that say, I've seen this thing, I could have changed it now, but no, I'm not doing it. I'm creating a ticket and somebody else will pick it up. And usually those ones are picked up quite quickly. Then, of course, the maintainer has the unspoken responsibility to go after those tickets when they are being implemented and then review those ones in a timely manner, which not always, it doesn't happen all the time, but we try to do this thing our best. But that's the thing as well, leaving opportunities for other ones to take the first contacts with the project and get familiar with the processes and start doing more and more into the project.
That's really cool. I really love that, as that kind of leaving the breadcrumbs to lead people on the journey that you yourself have been on is awesome. I think we touched briefly there on, like, as a maintainer, it's a lot easier to review code if it's in your area of expertise, and building kind of your expert knowledge of a part of the project can make you a better maintainer. Sort of getting more technical, you've worked on some complex kits, both as a maintainer and as a contributor. Can you talk a bit about what it's like to implement changes to a system like Kafka with all of these distributed and performance critical parts?
Yeah, so I could obviously talk about KIP 1150 for the ones who don't know. It's diskless Kafka. That's one of the KIPs that I'm being involved with lately. And that's a massive change proposal, basically, on Kafka. Having those big changes is always complicated, and it's basically complicated in 2 different levels of abstraction. So the first one is a technical complex problem. So any technical complex problem has a lot of research that needs to go into the project itself, investigate, analyze, design, have a proper design, and evaluate the trade-offs between the different any distributed system needs to work on trade-offs. So you cannot have everything. And I could go back to the CAP theorem and then say, yeah, you choose 2 of them. Sorry. So you could basically go in that one, right? So there is always these areas that you need to choose and compromises, and that's the technical part of it, and that's already hard enough. But then there is the people aspect on top of it, because when I do talks about open source, one of the things that I usually start with is explaining licenses and say things about legal code and all the stuff. And then I said, but okay, I bored you now for 10 minutes talking about legal things, but the important thing about open source is the people, it's the community. And making people agree to your idea, that's sometimes complicated and hard, not because your idea is not good, it's also because you need to be able to explain the points you're making in a nice way that it can be done without being on a one-on-one call, but rather on a text written that will work on its own, and it work with people from different cultures, different time zones, and different parts of the world, where they will understand, read your change proposal, and agree with it or disagree with it, and trying to agree and make compromises with different groups and people and say that works because of that, or why do we need this feature. So that's a question that a software developer, unfortunately, I would say, is not used to ask many times. When most of the times a software developer gets a feature, they might be able to sometimes ask, but why do we need that? And in many companies, the answer is because, I mean, customer asked for it and we need to do this thing. And sometimes that's unfortunate, because we should be able to try to ask better, why are we doing that, and go to the root cause of what is the problem that we're trying to solve, instead of trying to implement a solution. And in the open source space, it's always in that area. We always need to explain, okay, but why do we need to have this feature? And why do we need it on the first place? Why cannot be done this other way? And that's one of the really most complicated aspects of it. How can we make sure that people understand and share our understanding of the need for this feature to be part of a project, and not a complete different fork of the project or an plugin somewhere else? And that's one of the most complicated parts, which, as usual, it's humans talking to humans.
Speaking about humans talking to humans and kind of the complicated parts of this this project, if you look at the Kafka community today and versus, you know, where you started back when Kafka was in its infancy versus now, you know, with Kafka being this huge part of the industry, what's working well and where do you see room for improvement, particularly in those areas of reconciling different ideas about the direction of the project?
So when Kafka, if you go several years ago, if you go 5, 6, 7 years ago, what we will see is that Kafka was mostly a monolithic group of people working on some features. I'm not saying it was only and exclusively Confluent employees all the time, always, but there was a huge number of people that they were contributing from the company towards the open source, and we need to be grateful that they were doing that thing despite them being employed by a company, and the company was enabled them to do that. But obviously that meant that what Kafka was evolving into was mostly what this subgroup of people were pushing into this project. What changed over the years is that now we have way more people going to the Apache project and sharing their ideas and asking for changes and proposing changes. Some of those ones graduated from being the contributors to being maintainers, and even as I said before, the chair of the PMC for Apache Kafka is a person that works at, I think he works at IBM now. So hi, Mikael, if you are looking. So he's also not a Confluent employee. It's employed by another company. And as I said, it's not that he has special powers or anything like that, but it's a show and tell that it's not just one single group of people that are doing that. It's different companies that are getting together and investing in the project to make sure that the project moves forward. And I think that's what I've seen in the later time, basically, how it's evolving is we understood that there is no competition in the open source space. We are all working on the same objective, which is making Kafka better, newer, adaptable to the changes that are going in the industry. And we can only do that if we all work together on these projects. And I know that sounds really utopical, but actually that's what happens in the open source stage. We have meetings with people that work in completely companies that are basically competing on each other, but we are engaging with them, we are collaborating with them, and we're doing things together. And that happened several times, and it will continue happening for several years, because that's one of the beauties of the open source.
So cool. I'd like to pick your brains about that even further on all these kind of beautiful ways that open source can kind of bring people to collaborate on this common goal. But I'd like to close out with one final question. This is actually from someone in chat who was asking about, like, where are the beginner tickets found in Jira? So I think my final question for you would be, what's your advice for developers who want to get started making contributions to the Apache Kafka project, particularly people who maybe want to graduate from fixing little things here and there to maybe picking up a ticket and making bigger changes?
Yeah. So first of all, the first thing you need to go is on the project itself on GitHub, github.com/Apache/Kafka, and read the contributing.md file. So you need to go read the README and the contributing files. Those ones are the place where we explain what are the rules that the project follows. If you don't want to read the whole thing, the too long didn't read version of it is we are using Jira as a project tracker in any Apache software project. And what we are doing is issues.apache.org. If you go over there, you will find the Jira, and then you need to go to the project space, which is the Kafka one. And there are labels on every single issue in there, or many issues have labels. If you search for the label that is called newbie, that will share with you all the newbie tasks. You need to, again, go and filter the ones that are still open, because you will get every single issue. So you want to get the ones that are open. Ideally, you want to get the ones not assigned. And then from those ones, you can see any of them that you like. Apache has its own way of working. So everything needs to happen on a mailing list, for example. Any kind of discussions need to happen there. And one of the things you need to do is send an email to request permissions to assign yourself to an issue. So you need to basically send an email to dev@kafka.apache.org and say, hey, I would like to contribute. This is my Jira ID. This is my Confluent ID. And that's basically the two IDs you need to create. You need to create an account on the Apache Server Foundation, Jira, and Confluence. So you have the two IDs. And then once you have those IDs, we can grant you permissions to assign yourself. And then once you have the ticket you want to work, you assign yourself and you start working on it, which usually means create a fork of it, you create a new branch, you put the Jira ID on your branch name, you commit, you add tests, don't forget about them, and you push the change in. Once you have the PR, you can wait for couple of days maybe. If nobody comes, you can try to find a committer around and tag them, and they might have some time to look at the OPR.
Amazing. That's an awesome explanation. Thanks, Joseph. Hopefully we'll see lots more PRs headed your way very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today. That was awesome. I feel like I could pick your brains about Kafka all day, but that's all the time we have. But yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. It was really nice talking to you. And yeah, we can repeat this thing again with another cup of coffee.
Definitely. And thank you to everyone who's joined us live today for another episode of Get Kafka-Nated. Next time, we'll be learning all about diskless Kafka, which we heard about once or twice now, but we'll have a whole episode deep diving into it next time with Kafka contributor Greg Harris. If you've got topics you'd like us to explore, want to be a guest on the show, or have feedback on today's episode, please reach out on LinkedIn. We're always looking for new voices and perspectives from the Kafka community. Thanks for listening.